Thank you. I'm Becky Maddox from Brigham City, and you brought up yours and Senator Hatch's proposed balanced budget amendment. And to be very honest with you, I'm disappointed and I'm embarrassed. I did an analysis of that particular amendment, and Section 1 says total outlays shall not exceed total receipts unless 2/3 of the members of Congress shall provide for law by a specific excess by roll call vote. Well, that's okay, but Section 2 says that total outlays shall not exceed 18% of the GDP. Okay, but then you come down to Section 5, and it says the limit of the debt of the U.S. shall not be increased unless 3/5 vote for it. Okay, number one, why didn't you use percentages so people could easily compare? 2/3 is 66.6%. You round it to 67. 3/5 is 60%. So that proposed budget amendment does nothing to change anything. It only codifies or makes into law the shenanigans that already go on. Because if it's easier to increase the debt ceiling, that's what they'll do. Historically, that's what they do back there. They won't go for some of these other ideas. And my thought is that it was purposely made that way. Okay, Sections 6 and 7 say Congress may waive the provisions of Sections 1, 2, and 3, and 5 for any fiscal year in which a declaration of war is in effect and a majority provide for specific excess. Okay, and then Congress may waive in any fiscal year in which the U.S. is engaged in a military conflict that causes an imminent and serious military threat to national security and is so declared by 3/5, of the Congress to be that way. Now, a military conflict sounds like war to me. And it was in 1945 that World War II ended. That was almost 67 years ago. In those 67 years, there's only been 1 year in which we have not had an imminent and serious military threat to our national security. We've been involved in wars all over the world, all of them unconstitutional. But nevertheless, if you once again look at history, in 67 years, we've had 1 year where we could have applied the proposed balanced budget amendment. So it is really silly and ridiculous, I think, to try and put that balanced budget amendment as a serious kind of a bill. And I was, like I say, I'm really disappointed. Could you explain to me why in the world you would support something like that won't change a blasted thing?
Yes, thank you, Becky, for bringing this up. And I hope to be able to clarify a couple of points that might make you feel a little bit better about this. First of all, the 3/5 provisions, the two provisions that invoke the 3/5 threshold, that does bring about a change in a couple of respects. First of all, the 60-vote margin that already exists in the Senate exists by virtue of rule. That can be changed in some circumstances. It can be circumvented. So it makes that one permanent. It does create a new limitation in the House of Representatives. You require only a supermajority to pass something in the House of Representatives. It's still technically true in the Senate, but for all practical purposes, you're right. It's usually a 60-vote threshold in the Senate. But this does create a new burden on the House. It makes it more difficult for the House to increase the debt limit or to the other 3/5 provision applies, as you described, in the circumstance where we're in a military conflict not amounting to war. Now, I agree with you, first of all, that to the extent that you're saying that the 3/5 provision is not as harsh as I'd like it to be. I'd like it to be 2/3 in all of these circumstances. My original amendment, the one that I proposed initially in the form of SJR 5, had a 2/3 requirement in all of these, and I think was a little bit narrower on this one. This is one of these areas where we had to achieve a level of compromise in order to get all 47 Republicans in the Senate to back it. But to the extent you're saying all those margins ought to be 2/3 and not 3/5, I agree with you. The next point that you raises a very legitimate concern about our nation's unfortunate practice of going into what is in effect a war without a declaration of war. I share your concern with that. I think that this debate has been justified, the hasty resolution of this debate by those who like us to get into these conflicts without a declaration of war has come about as they've rationalized it by saying, look, you know, it's difficult sometimes to draw the line between, on the one hand, a legitimate exercise of the president's commander-in-chief powers in a discrete military exercise, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the war power, the declaration of war power that belongs to Congress. But the fact that they're willing so quickly to rationalize it simply because it can be difficult to define is unsatisfactory to me. I think that regardless of the fact that there can be some gray area, it's difficult to dispute that you are at war once your military establishment is actively engaged in hostilities directed at the military establishment or the government of a foreign country on that foreign country's soil. Now, by that standard, we were at war even in Libya. And I believe we were at war even in Libya, notwithstanding the fact that, at least according to the official reports, we didn't have boots literally on the ground. We were still enforcing a no-fly zone. We were still firing, as I understand it, upon their air defense systems on the ground. And so by that standard, and by a standard that I think makes sense, we were at war. We should have declared war before we went in there. We should have declared war before engaging in war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Vietnam, and in Korea. This debate needs to happen when we put our brave young men and women in harm's way. We owe it to them to give them the dignity and the debate that accompanies a formal declaration of war.